Welcome to meeting number 37 of the House of Commons Standing Committee on Agriculture and Agri-Food. Today's meeting is taking place in a hybrid format pursuant to the standing orders. Members attending in person in the room and remotely, we do have one witness on Zoom. Before we continue, I ask all participants to consult with the guidelines written on the cards on the back of your table regarding the microphones to ensure that we are protecting our interpreters. For the witnesses and the members, please wait until I recognize you by name before speaking or asking a question directly to a witness. For those participating through video conference, just click on the microphone icon to activate your microphone, and then please mute yourself when you are not speaking. Also, for our witness on Zoom, at the bottom of your screen, you can select the appropriate channel for interpretation, either floor, English, or French. And certainly those of you in the room are well versed on the earphone in front of you. If you do need some assistance, please let us know. I would like to remind the witnesses that committee members may ask questions in either French or English. If you do need interpretation, the panel in front of you will help you get the language in which you are most comfortable. And a reminder that all comments, please, are through the chair. Now I'd like to welcome our first panel of witnesses for our study on business risk management programs in Canada's agricultural sector. From the Dairy Processors Association of Canada, Matthew Ferrion. Matthew, good to see you again. And Chatu, she said I could say Chatu, so I could get that right. Dianda, Senior Director of Regulatory Affairs and Member Relations. From the Ontario Ministry of Agriculture, Food and Agribusiness, Stephen Duff, Chief Economist. And from Nobelet, Elise Gosselin, the Executive Director, who is joining us via video conference. Each of you will have up to 5 minutes to make your presentation, and then we will go to questions from our committee members. I will now start with the Dairy Processors of Canada. You have 5 minutes. Go ahead, please.
Bonjour, Monsieur le Président et membres du comité.
Good morning, Chair and committee members. On behalf of the Dairy Processors Association of Canada, I'd like to explicitly thank the committee for inviting an association representing processors to take part in your study. We recognise that the vast majority of stakeholders invited to speak as part of this study represent agricultural producers, farmers. We appreciate that you recognise that risk management does not stop at the farm gate. Our association and the National Association, as you know, which represents the political interests of the Canadian dairy processing industry. We work closely with dairy producers and all stakeholders across the sector. Since the Canadian dairy sector functions as an interdependent ecosystem, a disruption at any level of the chain, the supply chain, directly threatens the stability of the entire industry. Now I'd like to pass the floor to my colleague, Katurika.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Canada's dairy processing sector operates within an increasingly complex environment shaped by economic volatility, infrastructure challenges, and global trade pressures. While risk management programs have traditionally focused on primary production, processors also face significant operational and supply chain risk, along with the growing regulatory burden and red tape. As the government seeks to modernize these programs in 2028, advance broader regulatory reform within BRM framework, we encourage the consideration of 4 key principles. First, regulatory reform and red tape reduction must be treated as foundational policy principles. A key example is EPR, Plastic Extended Producer Responsibility. While the Canadian Council of Ministers of Environment, CCME, had the opportunity to agree on what would be covered from one ocean to the next, this was instead left unresolved, including what product should be covered, what pricing should be determined, and what reporting requirements should apply. As a result, we are ended up with patchwork of different systems across provinces. Processors ultimately bear these costs. Greater federal provincial harmonization is essential. Second, federal plastic registry imposes an usually burdensome reporting regime to us. Canada is effectively the only country requiring this level of detailed reporting of complex material. Some of information collected is repetitive, and we believe it provides limited policy value, while creating a significant administrative workload to us, while driving resources away from innovation, productivity, and competitiveness of the dairy sector. Third, Canada's dairy standards are 100 years old and increasingly misaligned with modern manufacturing and marketplace realities, particularly when it comes to standards of identities and compositional requirements that we have to adhere to. Canada should strengthen the regulatory alignment with our international global trading partners and international standards and scientific best practices. Fourth, research. Research should be recognized as a co-pillar of risk prevention, not an optional activity. It requires stable, long-term funding and sustained partnership to support ongoing innovation in dairy sector and dairy sector resilience. Finally, future policy frameworks should prioritize agile, outcome-based regulatory reform under these frameworks, adopting evolving science and market realities, strengthening our sector's resilience while supporting consumers, economic growth, and Canada's long-term food security. Thank you for your time. We look forward to your questions.
Thank you very much, Ananda. We will now go to Mr. Duff for 5 minutes, please.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, for the opportunity to speak today. My name is Steve Duff. I am Chief Economist of the Ontario Ministry of Agriculture, Food and Agribusiness. I started working on business risk management programs and farm risk management in 1997 and will offer my input and experience from Ontario. Canadian agriculture, in particular Ontario's agriculture sector, are incredibly diverse. Ontario farms produce over 200 different commodities annually each year. The production and market realities facing each of these over 200 commodities have long been different in many ways, but similar in others. All farms have and continue to face climate volatility, extreme and recurring weather events, geopolitical instability, input cost pressures, animal and plant disease, and overall market uncertainty. Primary ag, despite its many challenges, supports an agri-food system that provides food independence to Ontarians, while at the same time providing a key cornerstone of Ontario's economy. For example, roughly 1 in 9 Ontario jobs is tied to our agri-food sector. But some farms in specific sectors have a wider and longer-running suite of both public and private tools to help mitigate commonly faced risks. In Ontario, the actual number of commodities that have access to this wider and longer-running suite of public, such as BRM, advanced payments, etc. programs, and private tools, futures markets, forward contracts, etc., is relatively small. These may include grains and oilseeds, hogs, cattle, dairy, and poultry, which make up the bulk of our production and our land base, but there are another roughly 180 commodities, most of which are fruit, field vegetables, and other unique forms of agriculture that have much less access to private tools and in some cases public tools to manage what are often very unique risks. For example, the kind of public data on prices, production, and returns that is long-standing and available for many commodities not available to most of these individual commodities. Many of the most perishable products do not have private tools available to them other than direct-to-consumer sales to proactively mitigate price risk. These limitations in Ontario have affected land use, production levels, and increased import reliance for some of these commodities as producers make production decisions that favor commodities with more risk tools, such as grains and oilseeds. So it's important for us to acknowledge that there are limitations in the breadth of both public and private risk tools available and across commodities, and that more can be done for us to understand the needs of these commodities and develop and offer solutions. At the same time, for many of our farms, public and private tools have become increasingly fragmented and are now seen, understood, and often used as standalone as rather than part of an overall farm risk management framework. As we all face growing uncertainty, this makes it difficult for producers to manage production, financial, and mental risks they face in both a proactive and reactive sense. Our sector cannot continue to contribute to economic growth, food security, innovation, and sustainability without a solid, proactive risk management that starts at the farm level. As we look to the next policy framework, we need to examine how government policy, information, research, and knowledge transfer can help expand and enhance public and private risk management tools for all farms. This starts with improving available data for more commodities. Better data will lead to better information and better risk management tools, again, both proactively and reactively. A great example is publicly funded research that enables increased productivity at the farm level to reduce costs, increase production, and proactively manage risk. There is a need to help farmers develop and understand and implement an integrated framework of farm risk management that incorporates our current and our future public and private tools. This could offer greater certainty to more farms across Canada, empower them to be more actively engaged in their farm risk management as part of business planning, and in turn help them to continue to invest and grow their businesses. So in closing, I believe there are many ways to strengthen our sector through improved public and private tools that enable the sector to more actively prepare and manage risk. And again, I'd like to thank you for the opportunity to speak today. I think it's a great attention to this key issue, and I look forward to your questions.
Thank you very much, Mr. Duff. I will now go to Ms. Gosselin for 5 minutes, please.
Merci, je vais m'adresser.
Thank you. I will be speaking French. Chair, ladies and gentlemen of the committee, thank you for giving Novalet the opportunity to contribute to your work on agricultural risk management. Novalet's mission is to invest in research that provides solutions to the current and future challenges faced by dairy farmers and processors in Quebec. All Quebec farms and all milk processing plants contribute to the volume of milk produced. I do want to point out that Novalet is not acting on behalf of dairy producers, but as a strategic driver of innovation in partnership with all stakeholders in the sector. Innovation is a key risk management tool. In a changing agricultural landscape, risk management cannot rely solely on financial compensation mechanisms, but must also be based on the ability to anticipate, adapt, and innovate. In that regard, innovation is a fundamental tool for anticipating and reducing risks at source, improving business resilience, increasing the ability to adapt to rapid change. Our investment in research contributes, for example, to optimizing productivity per cow and improving the profitability of dairy farms, harnessing artificial intelligence to promote the welfare and health of dairy cows, preparing for and addressing biosecurity challenges, and adapting to climate change, as well as contributing to the dairy sector's carbon neutrality targets, both in production and processing, and Canada's targets. These advances directly help reduce exposure to economic, environmental, social, and health risks. A number of challenges currently limit the full potential of innovation as a risk management tool. At present, there's a disconnect between innovation and risk management programs, because current risk management programs often focus on ex post facto compensation rather than on prevention and strategic investment. Another issue is the insufficient and sometimes unstable funding. Innovation requires long-term, consistent, and predictable investment. Over the past 30 years, since 1985, when Novalet was established, we have consistently funded over 150 projects with a total value of $80 million. In that time, Agriculture and Agri-Food Canada's funding programs have been significant partners, both with funding and research programs. But in that time, funding has fluctuated significantly, and some programs, such as the Living Labs programs, have come to an end. We would be happy to continue Living Labs. We would have been happy to continue it until 28, but that's not going to happen. And that is an issue for the 20 farms that invested in reorienting their farms and changing to practices that reduce the carbon footprint. It's also difficult for the 40 or so researchers involved, and our ability to use results more broadly. In the light of those findings, we wish to put forward 3 messages. Recognize innovation as a pillar of risk management. Programs should explicitly incorporate research and innovation as tools for risk reduction and not merely as development activities. We would like to strengthen investment in applied research. For Agriculture Canada, investing in partnership with organizations like Novalet ensures continuity in innovation efforts, a tailored response to the specific challenges of the dairy sector, as well as better knowledge transfer to farms and dairies. Third, maintaining Agriculture and Agri-Food Canada's research infrastructure and teams. In Canada, university and government research institutions have developed in a complementary manner. Any cut to research infrastructure represents a net and irreparable loss when it comes to addressing the research priorities and research needs of dairy farmers in Canada. In conclusion, agricultural risk management would benefit from a more holistic approach, from prevention to compensation. Fully integrating innovation is a key solution. Novalet is ready to collaborate with public authorities to maximize the impact of research investment and contribute to a more resilient and sustainable dairy sector. Thank you for your attention. I'll be happy to answer your questions.
Thank you very much, Madame Gosselin. We'll now turn to the Conservatives for 6 minutes. Mr. Epp, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to the witnesses for appearing. When a resident of Chatham-Kent-Leamington turns 100, we prepare a certificate, and I usually try and deliver that personally. I wasn't aware that our dairy standards were 100 years old, and I'm not sure if that's the same cause for celebration. But I'm going to begin with Mr. Duff. You identified that Ontario's agriculture is very diverse, with over 200 commodities, 180 that aren't necessarily fitting into some of the existing programs, at least not well. Broadly speaking, testimony at the committee has shown that agri-insurance is largely supported where it does work well. Obviously, most of the focus has been on agri-stability and improvements that are required there. So let's begin with that. Are there opportunities, again, to get at some of those other 180 commodities to improve the linkages between our tax filing systems and the capture of data? You also mentioned the importance of data, that we need to improve the programs. What are the opportunities there, as well as to address, let's get to the three main criticisms: lack of acknowledgement of the diversification at farm level, timeliness of payments, as well as, the coverage moving basically from stabilization to disaster coverage as the margins have been, or the coverage levels have been dropped. So improved data collection, would that address some of those concerns and also allow the timeliness, particularly around, farmers want to maintain cash filing, but, the agri-stability program works on an accrual basis. Can you address those concerns?
Thank you for your question. Again, improved information, we've evolved in the sector. I've been involved with this, obviously, for close to 30 years. Some of the issues that have caused challenges with respect to available data are the same as they were 30 years ago when I started working on this. We have a couple different options for producers when it comes to tax filing. All of those forms use different sets of coding. The more detailed one that goes all the way back to the NISA program would, for example, break out horticultural production across Canada and other unique commodities in a more detailed way, enabling better data. We could harmonize that and do that in a way that would greatly improve the ability to help those producers both access the programs, et cetera. We really don't have a singular database for farm income in this country. It's disjointed in many different ways. It's still very functional, but it could be improved in ways that could contribute to the factors that have been identified as far as timeliness, simplicity, et cetera. I'd also mention that, and I listened to the testimony from the other day from some people from MNP who I know quite well, and I echo some of the comments there. We have, by my math, over 75% of farms in Canada have external credit. If you have external credit, you're creating an accrual financial statement, which has inventories, et cetera. That is the base of good, solid production information, whether it's for the farmer, whether it's for government, whether it's CRA or industry. And I think to acknowledge that and enhance some ways that we could do that, it doesn't mean you have to suddenly file income tax on the accrual basis, because if you're a corporation, you submit your accrual financial statement and adjust to cash. We could do that in a much greater sense with relative ease, in my opinion, and that would in turn enable some better data, et cetera. Not without work, granted, but that would go, I think, quite a ways towards improving some of the things that have been identified.
Thank you. As we've been going through this study, there have been calls not to presently tweak our present suite of programs, but to actually really take a look at some major overhauls to get at some of those fundamental weaknesses. And again, they've been largely focused around AgStab. I'm going to pick up on a comment you said that in your testimony that we're looking for an overall framework. So could you envision an AgStab national program that basically followed a plug-and-play model where regional programs that are supported well by different sectors would be plugged into a national framework, and then with the enhanced tax collection data, access a more timely response from the program and a more predictable response?
So again, from the perspective of harmonized data and my experience in terms of administering that kind of data set, it all does come back to the farm's financial information, income statement. One of the things that, again, is interesting about this idea of lack of information is that for these more unique commodities, their financial statement, their production records are the true base of that information for their sector within their own information. So to have this common data set that would clearly identify even peaches as an example, which is a pretty common product, if you're not participating in Agri-Invest or Agri-Stability, which many don't, your data is lumped in as a fruit sale. And so Statistics Canada, Agri-Food Canada, ourselves, we don't have the ability to analyze that. To have that base broken out sets you up for many different options. Again, if everybody's in the system, you have tools available to you to make other kinds of calculations and adjustments, et cetera.
So picking up on the word of options, right now there's been calls to raise the coverage level back to 85%. Perhaps more experienced producers would not necessarily seek the 85% if there were some cost or discount considerations. Do we have, you said you've been in the business 30 years, we have got margin accounting records going back at least 20 plus years. Is there enough information to create actuarially sound a matrix of premiums potentially for a program that would take into account on-farm diversification with an enhanced collection of data, as well as producer choice of different coverage levels?
So again, I'm not an actuary, but I have done enough of this stuff to know that data is a limitation. Our current data set specifically, I can use the peach example, but it's a good one in that, that particular set of data is more limited than it might be for a grain farm or it might be for a beef farm. And similarly, if we were to have that kind of model for dairy, poultry, some other commodities, it would be limited as well. To say that we can come up with actuarially sound numbers is tricky because an actuarial program will tend to build in both what would be determined as a fair premium, how much the program would cost over time, and then in a risk to reflect the unknowns. And there's a lot of unknowns. And oftentimes that's the additional cost from a premium perspective that becomes really tricky and challenging to get something that could be both seen as effective and affordable. And so I think that, again, with that better data, it gets us a better chance to do that. I was part of that very exercise in the 2000s here. The CASE program, again, was originally designed to have a continuous participation of all farms in Canada, right? That would have helped facilitate that data set. So it would give you a better chance, but again, it's not a slam dunk necessarily either, and it is significant effort.
Thank you, Mr. Duff.
Yep.
It's the end of his time. I gave you a little leeway there to try and finish your thought. But
Appreciate that.
Now to Madame Danderand for 6 minutes, please.
Merci à vous d'être là et de nous partager vos vues sur ce sujet très important.
Thank you for being here today. Thank you for sharing your views. I have a very dynamic dairy sector in my riding, including people who were part of Living Labs, who win the excellence competition every year. So very, very dynamic and vibrant dairy industry. We also have a very large dairy processor. So I'm very interested in dairy farmers' existence. At present, the dairy industry is facing a number of kinds of uncertainty, including inflation, energy costs, labor costs, climate, international trade, and so on. In your view, processors and Novolé members, what are the most difficult risks to manage for the dairy industry and the dairy processing industry?
Merci pour la question. C'est sûr.
Thank you for the question. I'd say international trade risks. We work closely with the government on these, but of course, uncertainty. The uncertainty isn't coming from our government. In addition to what's coming to us south of the border, uncertainty's been part of the new reality for almost 2 years now. Energy costs are a factor too. Yes, they have an impact, absolutely. And the last thing would be profound changes in the market, though those also present an opportunity. Of course, you've heard that protein is becoming increasingly popular. It's always impressive to see how events can be explained by past research. For example, people's desire to eat more protein. We've seen that over the past 2 years, and dairy protein particularly, which is the best possible protein, of course. But if we come back to research, it's shown that dairy protein is the best kind of protein for fighting sarcopenia, which is the loss of muscle mass, which a lot of weight reduction medications have as a side effect. So yes, you're losing weight, but you don't want to lose muscle mass. And as Ellie said, that's one of the reasons why research is so important. And it's interesting to see how past research contributes to the present. So I do believe that the rising popularity of protein and dairy protein does come from that. It does help to maintain muscle mass. Does that qualify as a risk? No. It has disrupted the dairy market, but it's also a huge opportunity. If I may add something to that, I agree with what's been said. I would also add issues like climate change. Our producers are really on the front lines. The 20 producers, part of the Living Lab on carbon neutrality, have in common the pride of passing on their farms to the next generations. So they do worry about those costs, as well as issues like drought, climate events, like those we've seen. That's not something coming to us in the future. These issues are here now. Also, cultural practices in which they're involved are very much part of this. There are also efforts to reduce the carbon footprint of dairy production, and this helps meet farmers' goals of carbon neutrality and also help processors who also have carbon reduction goals. We're almost at the point where we'll be able to meet the requirements of distributors. Thank you. I would ask you to carry on, because you're working on a broad range of projects, including biosecurity and processing. Do you feel that there's an increasing demand by the industry for solutions to reduce long-term risks? Yes, I would say yes. Novelle's been there for 30 years, and farmers and processors invest together. We didn't know how long we'd last, but we have. And past research is very helpful in establishing solutions for the future. But funding projects doesn't just provide knowledge or research results that we can transfer. It also hinges on having researchers who understand the issues. We now have established researchers in biosecurity, biosafety, working on avian flu and other problems, people who know how to respond and who can support the dairy industry. And that applies to other areas. Last year, Novelle carried out on the process of reflections on its on finances and funding. Dairy processors decided to increase Novelle's financial capacity and increase funding for research so that shows that what we're doing is useful. When we support research that does meet short, medium, and long-term issues for dairy producers and processors, they want to support us, and then we make sure that those results are actually applied at the farm or at the processors.
Now to Mr. Lemire pour 6 minutes, s'il vous plaît.
Merci.
Mr. Lemire, 6 minutes. Thank you, Mr. Frigon. First of all, thank you for being here today. From the start of this study, we've talked a lot about how important it is to diversify markets and find new export markets, but not much about the importance of domestic markets. Domestic markets for milk are very high. And how does supply management help manage risks and strengthen the dairy sector? It provides stability. Before anything, we are very much focused on the domestic market, and that certainly provides tremendous stability. It's paradoxical in a way, because I was talking about disruption in the right sense of the word, in the positive sense of the word, because, as I said, people are wanting more protein, and demand for dairy fat has increased, or milk fat has also increased even faster than demand for protein. It's absolutely astounding to see how quickly these changes have occurred. Nonetheless, there can be issues tied to consumer demand, but stability is really the key word here. In the current situation, I believe we should be focusing on processing, and if there's one industry doing that, it is dairy, whether it's cheese producers or other processors. Can you talk to us about how important it is to develop local networks to reduce, for example, the impact of shipping costs? How can we duplicate the dairy model in other agricultural sectors? On Boréalais, I think there was a recent article on it. Well, I could provide you with some yogo. It's particularly tasty. Yes, I know the family producing it. That's a good question. And this is really consumer driven. There's a demand for protein, so we provide it. Sometimes prices need to be optimized. What we need to do is be aligned with consumer demand. And that's what we try to do as producers and processors. There's really a massive demand for protein that we didn't see coming, so we're doing what we can to meet it. There might be niche markets for certain products, but they're growing too, and there's consumer demand. What are the risks for processors? Because we're talking about risk management, and we have the impression that things are going well for processors. But what are the major risks? International trade, uncertainty. I think we have to learn to live with those risks, because we can see how the administration works in the U.S. It's not exactly a model of stability, and they can surprise us at any time of day. So I'd say that's a significant risk for investment. So the strength of the system is stability, but there are events outside the system that do add risk and do add instability, and that has an impact. So we have to take those risks into account when investment decisions are being made. One of the first bills this Parliament adopted was C-202 to protect supply management. And I believe that has made the market stable and instilled trust. But for processors, and we've had a chance to talk about this, I think it's processors who are going to be a bit more vulnerable to the market share that U.S. firms are after. So how are you preparing for that, and what recommendations would you make as to us as legislators? What can we do to protect Canadian producers and processors and make sure that they buy their raw materials in Canada? We've worked closely with Canadian dairy producers, and our meetings with the government are always joint. We really stand together. We've made enough concessions, and it could be argued that U.S. demand is for processed products, but yes, in some cases, it is the processors who are on the front line. In the agreement, there have been measures. There was a time when people didn't seem to want any more protein, but now there seems to be a dearth of it. And those shifts in consumer demand are disrupting things, certainly shaking things up. And the same thing, or phenomenon, I should say, seems to be happening in the U.S. It remains to be seen whether there'll be an impact on U.S. demand. Thank you.
We will now go to Mr. Gord for 6 minutes, please.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Chair. My first question is for Ms. Gosselin. In your introduction, you talked about working in partnership with dairy farms and others. So I'd like to come back to your partnership with farms, dairy farms. Dairy farmers agree to invest their time, animals, and infrastructure with Novelet so that research to move forward can be conducted. You've done a good job. In over 30 years, the Canadian dairy sector has changed hugely, and a great many of the positive changes have come about because of research and different strains of dairy animals and production changes. So what's made the biggest difference in that research? Thank you for the question. It is a very good one. Agriculture and Agri-Food Canada created a program that sets itself apart worldwide. It's the Living Lab program. I've been with Novelet for 25 years, and what that project does is put into practice a very important aspect of the industry. All research needs to be aimed at solving a problem on a farm, so we want knowledge that can be transmitted and used. So we conduct the research project and then transfer it to the producers. And what's still being done is this in real time, in cooperation. Basically, farmers talk to researchers about how to improve their practices on their operations. They're supported. They identify the issues. They propose improvements, and then they're supported by a group of scientists in putting those into place. So there is a time to market. Research is being used almost in real time, and that's an extraordinary showcase for all farmers because they see others getting involved. It's a wonderful concept. Producers aren't on our payroll. They're not getting paid for this. They participate because they see advantages for their operations in the short, medium, and long term. They're innovative, so that is also a risk in and of itself. They provide tremendous bodies of data, and they can also help by saying why they prefer or don't like certain practices. The Living Labs project is exceptional. It's been wonderful. We hoped it would carry on because it is the kind of project that needs to run in the long term. It represents a process of reflection that includes climate change and greenhouse gas emissions, basically new science that's still evolving. We hoped it would be there for longer, but it is drawing to a close. But there are some essential components of it that we feel should be carried on. Ms. Gosselin, you took the words right out of my mouth. You talked about the exceptional contribution made by producers, unpaid producers. They volunteered time, animals, infrastructure. If we could put a figure on what that might represent, if every aspect of that study or those studies had to be paid, would you say the share contributed by producers accounted for more than what the government contributed? Would it account for 50, 60 or more percent, a higher percentage than of the cost of the project? I would have liked a study to establish that. What we do isn't really comparable in that way. But it's more than time. What they're doing is reworking the way that they produce milk by doing it by means of new practices. So, yes, how to put a figure on it, that is important. But I do believe that Agriculture and Agri-Food Canada is well aware of what's happening. Quite often, it's a multiple of the contribution provided by AAFC. Novalet has funded a portion of the research and provided some of the capacity, and producers signed up. It's an exceptional contribution that they're making. Thank you, Mr. Gould. Your time is up.
Mingdrilli for 5 minutes, please.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur le Président. Alors, merci à tous les témoins d'être ici aujourd'hui. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Chair.
Alors, je vais tourner mes questions.
My questions, to begin with, will be for you, Mr. Vrillon. Could Canada lose its ability to process dairy products to other countries, and if so, why? It depends on what we end up seeing in future international agreements. That could happen. If access was increased, there is legislation in place, but yes, that could happen. If they were given more access, and if there was an impact that reduced the capacity of some businesses making niche products for export. So that could also reduce capacity. Yes, that could reduce domestic processing capacity. What conditions need to be in place for Canada to remain an attractive place in which to invest in dairy processing? Well, conditions that are conducive to investment. I was talking about uncertainty. The uncertainty south of our border is outside our control. Basically, stable conditions are good, and that also means not providing or giving or making more concessions in future international agreements. Basically, anything that contributes to the stability of the system is more conducive to investment. So what we need is stable but growing. We don't want a stable system that's stagnating. There's not really any growth at the moment. So any factor that contributes to greater stability is absolutely conducive to investment. And given that this is a growing market, there are investment projects in the industry at present. But the cloud of uncertainty still hangs over the industry, the uncertainty rooted in international trade. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Duff. So should provinces have more flexibility to tailor BRM tools to regional risks and commodity differences?
Thank you for the question. Again, I think not necessarily in the policy realm right now, but I think that there are significant differences across the country. The data sets, et cetera, the administration systems we have in place now do give flexibility to contemplate those types of things. We have some differences across Canada already. We have, price insurance in Western Canada that's developed over time with the objective to give some flexibility for producers. We have the ASRA program, longstanding program in Quebec. We have the risk management program in Ontario and some other different contexts across the country. It really starts with a framework of information and data and understanding that every sector is different and how you can best sort of fit in with that. And recognizing that we do have international trade agreements, et cetera, that we're trying to comply with, and that the reality is that most producers are operating within a sort of set of frameworks as far as their production and economics on their farm go, and how we can try to adjust that.
Thank you so much. And are there Ontario-specific programs or innovations that could serve as models for federal BRM reform?
Well, again, I think that, Ontario has had a number of provincial initiatives over the years. Those programs have taken consideration from other provinces' initiatives, right? For example, during the BSE crisis, we had a set of programs. Alberta has a set of programs. We worked together in developing them, but they were somewhat unique. The same with the ASRA program in Quebec. The Ontario Risk Management Program kind of evolved out of that in terms of some of the core funding and adjusted to different data sets and things like that we have available to us. So again, I think there's examples for everybody to learn from, right? The agri-stability program we have now, which was CASE, which was the disaster program before it, started in Alberta. Then it became into PEI. Then we did it in Ontario. That was the first thing I worked on when I started with the ministry. So again, I think we've all collectively built on that initiative as time has went by. There's significant infrastructure from a staff and policy perspective across Canada that work together very, very closely. Mm-hmm. It's just a matter of trying to figure out what fits best at a point in time. And the more information, back to my original sort of testimony, the better information we have, the wider the data sets we have, the better we can try to address those issues as time changes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Duff. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Now to Mr. Lemire for 2.5 minutes, please.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Chair. Mr. Duff, first of all, thank you for being here today. I think the issue we're talking about, risk management, one aspect of it that's often neglected is mental health. There are organizations in my area where positions have been eliminated because of ping pong played among governments in one thing. I've seen you have asked for support, so you have set up mental health programs. What support have you received from the government? And can it be improved? We know how much demand there is by farmers and farm workers, for example, who are going to be or are being affected by the proposed railway.
The question. Again, mental health isn't necessarily my area. I do know that it is a risk area that's continually identified in the sector. It does come back to, even the discussions about processing, certainty, stability, things that people can plan for and understand how they can work within the framework that they have. I think that there has been considerable amounts done in this country for primary producers from a mental health perspective, But, in general, the dollars at play for most producers today are so large, considered, compared to when I started in the industry or even in previous generations. It's very daunting, and that in turn puts stress on it. And I think the degree to which we can provide tools for people to see the broader aspects of how they can run their business, plan their business, create information to both proactively manage the comments around risk and innovation. That is as big a risk management tool as agri-stability, crop insurance, et cetera, in the end when we react. And so again, I think that there's been significant efforts. Could there be more? Possibly, yes. I don't know enough about that area specifically to give you recommendations, but every producer is in a very precarious position at points in their career. I've experienced that myself personally on a bunch of occasions. And so, it's something that the more you have tools in your toolkit to proactively deal with it, the better you can react. In my experience, that in turn reduces your mental issues, which ultimately put you in a better place to be able to sleep at night.
Thank you very much, Mr. Duff.
Thank you.
Now, to stay on time, because we have 4 witnesses in that next panel, I'm just going to give the last round to Mr. Epp and Ms. Chattel at 4 minutes, if that's okay, just so we can, it'll take a little bit of time to switch over. So we'll go to Mr. Epp for 4 minutes, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Duff, you just mentioned the link between risk and innovation, and there's obviously a link between innovation and research. So given Ontario's huge budget surpluses and OMAFRA's extra monies, would you be able to pick up the slack from the ag research station closures that are being done federally?
Unfortunately, you're asking the wrong person. What I can do is advocate for the benefits of research and help to try to figure out how we transfer that research effectively to producers to help them innovate and manage risk on their farms. It is without a doubt the biggest thing for our sector. The discussions on dairy. I grew up on a dairy farm. Grad work in dairy, et cetera. And the dairy sector has long understood the benefits with respect to research, and it's been a major driver of that sector in addition to the stability that supply management offers, and there's all kinds of other examples to it. But again, I can't comment on how the money gets allocated.
I'll ask for a comment from dairy on ag research station closures.
Yeah, we totally agree with what Elise presented earlier. Like some of the decisions were unfortunate, and the impact it had on the living labs. So yeah, it's we are totally aligned with what Elise presented earlier. So
thank you. I'm going to go back to ag stability for a bit with Mr. Duff. There's been calls, there's been efforts or consideration given to simplify the ag stab model to go away from a margin model to look at more revenue, the revenue side only. Can you comment on that? From my perspective, that doesn't address the cost side, and that's where a lot of the pressures are coming right now from margin. Is the value of just considering the revenue side of the equation worth ignoring cost pressures?
Again, I think that one of the issues with respect to program design is ultimately what is the objective of the program. A revenue protection program has aspects already built into it with a margin program, right? The program started originally with a gross margin concept going back to NISA. We modified it going into case with production margin for a reason. And so that was to largely try to provide more balanced support, small versus large farms, et cetera. Revenue insurance is definitely worth considering. The reason being is that producers don't feel that a margin-based program meets all of their needs. Whether that's true or not is really up to the individual, not to me as an analyst. I think that it's worth looking into. There's costs associated with it. For some commodities, again, we have lots of data to estimate revenue. For others, we don't. And again, my experience would be that one of the things about revenue that's kind of interesting for a lot of commodities is that the yields are going up so significantly on a per unit basis for many commodities. It has a tendency to kind of offset the price declines you might see in certain scenarios. And so revenue is different than price, which is different than margin, net income, et cetera. So again, without trying to get into like specifying the right policy, with better data, with more data, you can have a look at those things in a more detailed way, and hopefully can evolve your thinking as time goes by.
Thank you. I want to get to one last question, and that is, given the enhanced geopolitical risks that are facing all sectors of our society, including agriculture, and the potential costs, and we just talked about the impact of costs on a potential revenue program, one of the tools, and this committee won't be surprised to hear the word reinsurance come out of my mouth, is that a potential tool where the sector, both governments and producers, can offset some of those risks in future program design that stabilizes both producer premiums, depending on what the design of the program, and potential hits to government treasuries.
Can you answer that in about 30 seconds, Mr. Duff, if that's possible?
Reinsurance has a long history in this country. From the production insurance perspective, it has not been used in revenue or margin programs to my knowledge. It does come back to whether the reinsurance industry sees it as a risk they're willing to take on and the degree to which government can make that cost effective. It's not clear to me that that's true, but it doesn't mean it shouldn't be evaluated. And again, I think it's worth looking into. We've done it before in my experience, and we could evaluate it again and see where that goes from a cost prevention perspective.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Mr. Duff. And now to Madame Chatel pour 4 minutes, s'il vous plaît.
Oui, merci beaucoup. Merci.
Thank you, and thanks to our witnesses for being here for this important study. Some witnesses were saying we needed to be clear about the main goals of the next strategic framework. I'm hearing 2 main goals. Risk management programs need to be able to respond and provide assistance to farmers when they have to deal with a shock, be it a shock from trade or climate change. I also hear that there needs to be a focus on risk prevention, i.e. innovation to prevent climate risks or attenuate them in some way. Mr. Frigon, you were talking about risks stemming from international trade. How do risk management programs, or how could they be adapted to provide better coverage or for farmers and protect them more effectively? That's a good question. Producers might be better able to answer that. When we come back to research, how can research be incorporated into risk management programs? Research is a prevention tool in the longer term. But for the farm as such, there could be tools established to mitigate international trade risks. If you ever get any ideas, please feel comfortable submitting them to us in writing.
Have the agri-stability started first at a provincial level. This committee heard that this is one of the main programs that would need reform or to be more relevant to or protect better the risk that we all trying to help our farmers overcome. What exactly would be the changes that you think are needed at this point to this program to make it more relevant for our farmers?
Thank you for the question. Again, agri-stability is sort of have been the core program. Again, it's a whole farm margin-based program that has had different iterations of it. Started it as a 70% coverage program in 1998 that I was one of the people involved in designing. It's ended up at that. In the middle of all of it, we had 100%, 85%, and 70% through the case years. It goes back to what the objectives are. I'm not here to comment on what the objectives are or what they might be. What I know is that different farms and different commodities face different risk profiles. So the idea of trying to help people protect is a function of what their circumstance is. And many people, even in the same industry, even neighbor to neighbor, have different profiles. And that's often one of the challenges in the sector of being able to provide fair and equitable support. I think agri-stability specifically, a lot of information is needed to help people better understand how it fits for them rather than it doesn't work. Now, again, I'm not saying it works for everybody. I can tell you that from experience. However, if we're going to try to improve management, people need to have a more holistic approach to it. What do I contribute? What does government contribute? What does industry research contribute? Bring it all together. There are ways to do that. It's not without effort and time and money, but there are ways to do that, in my opinion. And again, I think those are some of the steps you'd have to make and move forward.
Merci. Et Madame Gosselin, je pense pas que vous aurez le temps de...
Thank you. Ms. Gosselin, I don't think you'll have time to answer, but if you do have time to answer in writing, that would be wonderful. How could the next strategic framework provide better support for innovation from the standpoint of risk prevention?
I would ask one other to Madame Gosselin, if you could submit in writing as well, and maybe from the dairy processors as well. Both of you said the benefit of supply management is stability, but I've received a number of calls from dairy farmers in particular who are struggling, and I happened to look up the statistics this afternoon on from AFC. The number of dairy farms has reduced from just over 12,000 to now just over 8,000 over the last decade. So I'd be curious, from your points of view, is this an issue of just consolidation, or why are we seeing an industry that should be stable? Is there something they were missing in the BRM programs, or what would be the reason to see this decline in the number of dairy farms when we should have that stability as a result of the framework of this program? I'd be just curious on your perspective on that, if you don't mind submitting that to the committee. Well, thank you very much for that, and I will now suspend for 5 minutes to switch over to the next panel. Thank you very much, colleagues. just in case for those who may be unfamiliar, we do have a couple of witnesses who are on Zoom today. I know, Ryder, you've been with us before for sure, so you know how the Zoom works, and I want to try to get through this as quickly as possible to make sure we can take advantage of our witnesses who are here. To our witnesses, please remain on mute until I recognize you by name to speak. Those of you who who are here in your panel in front of you, you can pick the language of which you are most comfortable to ensure that you are able to follow the proceedings. And those who are on Zoom, just remain on mute until you are speaking. And when you are done speaking, please go back to mute. Pursuant to Standing Order 1082 and the motion adopted by this committee on September 18th, the committee is resuming our study on business risk management programs in Canada. I would now like to welcome the witnesses who are with us in this panel. From the Canadian Bison Association, Executive Director Scott Yule. From the Canadian Cattle Association, General Manager Ryder Lee on video conference. He is joined by Braden Schmidt, President of the Canadian Cattle Youth Council. And we also have Corlina Patterson with us again today with the Canadian Sheep Federation. And I misunderstood, so we actually have Ryder and Braden are one representing the Cattle Association, so you can ask questions of either one, but they'll only be giving one presentation. But I will now begin with Mr. Yule of the Canadian Bison Association for a 5-minute presentation. Please go ahead.
Good afternoon. Thank you for the opportunity to speak about the Canadian bison industry, the challenges our sector faces, and the importance of effective business risk management programming for agriculture. The CBA represents bison producers and industry partners from across Canada. Canadian bison industry is a uniquely Canadian success story. What was once a species on the brink of extinction has become a sustainable livestock sector that contributes to quality food production, rural economies, Indigenous partnerships, and environmental stewardship. Canadian ranchers have played a massive role in bringing back the bison, and together with marketers and industry partners have created increasing demand for the low-fat, high-protein, delicious meat. As a keystone species, bison production also aligns well with environmental and grassland conservation goals. Bison utilize native grasslands effectively and efficiently, support biodiversity, and are well adapted to Canadian agriculture. Canada is recognized globally for producing high-quality bison genetics and premium bison products. Bison meat is more available to the Canadian consumer than ever before. Last year, Canadian federal plant processing increased to the highest volume in over a decade, which resulted in a decrease in animals going live across the border to the U.S., the U.S. being the largest bison market in the world. Despite its strengths and positive developments, it also faces several ongoing challenges. Trade, 2 years ago, 80% of marketed animals went to the U.S. That reduced last year, like I said, with the increase in processing here in Canada, reduced to about 50%. But the U.S. will always be our largest market. As such, trade impediments to the U.S. would create significant challenges to the industry. Other than the EU and Australia and the U.S., we lack export markets. We would appreciate a small mindset change when trade negotiators are working on other markets to include bison and red meat discussions. Quite often we hear of, the expansion of the beef into different sectors and different countries, and it would be great if we just changed our phraseology a little bit to include bison. At the same time, a number of factors have contributed to a reduced supply, so we're challenged a bit in that regard. Farmers are retiring and consolidation is happening. A number of years of drought have contributed to the sell-off of animals. Bison live on pastures up to 365 days a year, and bison ranchers are typically low-cost producers and don't typically buy feed. Demand has outstripped supply, and to be frank, we need more bison. Another challenge is because the industry is relatively small, it does not always fit neatly into agricultural programs and policies that were primarily designed around larger commodity sectors. This can leave bison producers underserved and overlooked. Sector faces market volatility. Bison production cycles are long, and rebuilding herds after downturns can take years. Producers cannot quickly increase production in response to market demand the way some other livestock sectors can. At the same time, as mentioned above, the industry remains heavily dependent on export markets and vulnerable to disruptions in international trade, transportation, and consumer demand. There's also tremendous opportunity. Consumer demand for meat continues to grow, particularly amongst consumers seeking nutritious, sustainably raised protein. With the right support and policy environment, the Canadian bison industry continue to expand and contribute to Canada's agricultural economy. This brings me to business risk management programming, which, when you talk to producers, the one that comes up front most quickly is agri-stability. These are critically important tools for agriculture producers, including bison producers. Utilization amongst our producers is low, though, due to ongoing concerns regarding accessibility, predictability, and effectiveness for sectors like ours. Again, bison production differs from many other livestock sectors because of the longer production timelines, smaller herd numbers, and unique market structures. As a result, some BR programs, calculations, and reference margins do not always reflect the reality of the bison operations. Producers can experience significant losses before support is triggered, and payments often arrive long after the financial damage has occurred. The CBA encourages government to continue improving agri-stability that is more responsive, bankable, and reflective of actual risk. Timely interim payments, simplified administration, and program design that recognize our sector would be greatly appreciated and improve confidence. Also, livestock price insurance is not available for bison as it is for our friends in the cattle industry. Our understanding is that because of limited pricing data for bison, while we don't have a futures market and resources for sophisticated pricing models, we have seen actually that bison and beef prices are highly correlated. They move in similar directions at similar times, and particularly in recent years, and wonder if there's opportunities to work with some of that data to support price insurance. In closing, the Canadian bison industry is resilient, innovative, and deeply connected to Canada's rural and environmental landscape. Our producers are committed to supplying high-quality food while stewarding the land for future generations. With practical policy support, fair access to risk management programs, and recognition of the unique nature of our sector, the Canadian bison industry can continue to grow and contribute to Canada's agricultural success. Thank you for the opportunity, and I look forward to questions.
Thank you very much, Mr. Yule. Great to have you here. We had bison on our farm when I was a kid, so it was a very interesting animal to deal with. So it's great to see that this industry is going. Now we'll go with the Canadian Cattle Association, Canadian Cattle Youth Council, and Mr. Schmidt, I believe you were giving the presentation for 5 minutes, please.
Thank you. Good afternoon, Chair, members, and thank you for the opportunity to be here today. And thank you for including the next generation in this conversation. My name is Braden Schmidt. I farm with my wife and 2 young kids near Didsbury, Alberta. I'm proud to serve as the president of the Canadian Cattle Youth Council. Our family is part of a multi-generational family farm with cattle and grain. Parents, siblings, and several young families are working together to build a future and steward land that's been in our family for 4 generations. We're at an important moment in Canada's cattle sector, with early signs of herd rebuilding and strong demand for Canadian beef at home and around the world. When I think about BRM programs, it goes beyond thinking about the next year. It's whether there's a viable future for my children here. Less than 12% of cattle operations in Canada have an operator under 35. Strong BRM programs are key to supporting young producers. Part of that challenge is the broader uncertainty. And trade policy is top of mind for cattle producers. Between the uncertainty with CUSMA review and added pressure with Mercosur negotiations this week, granting board permanent beef access to low standard imports would put added pressure on our domestic market and send the wrong signals to the next generation. Young producers are driving innovation and continuing to raise Canada's already high production standards. Competing against lower cost imports produced under weaker standards does not create a level playing field. It erodes the progress we're working to build. Canadian beef must not be a bargaining chip. If Canada wants to ensure future generations of beef producers in our country, we need our government to stand up and say no to Mercosur beef imports. As beef producers prepare for future generations to take over the family farm, we need to ensure the BRM suite is working and equitable. Livestock price insurance is a critical tool, especially for young producers. It's recognized by lenders and helps us ensure financing, grow our operations, and manage the stress that comes with it all. It's a tool my family uses, but high premium costs driven by market volatility often put it out of reach when we need it most, like many other young producers. Other young producers, unlike crop unlike crop insurance and U.S. cattle producers, the Canadian cattle producers do not have government cost-shared premiums and shoulder these costs all alone. That gap needs to be addressed. The government should move now to introduce a cost-shared LPI premiums and make it a permanent program. Agri-stability plays an important role when producers face major disruptions, from weather to markets to rising costs. It's important the program continues to evolve to better reflect the realities of cattle production. The current payment cap also limits effectiveness, particularly those for the feedlot sector and other mid to large operations. We recommend an increase in the payment cap to $15 million, with a regular review in line with FPT policy frameworks, eliminating the cap in the event of catastrophic disruptions, such as foreign animal disease outbreaks, and enhancing the trigger to 85% of the reference margin. Our Youth Council has also taken an interest in the feasibility of whole farm insurance. We look forward to staying engaged alongside the Canadian Cattle Association as this conversation evolves and what potential it may have for the next generation. In closing, BRM programs are not just safety nets. They are signals to the next generation. Signals that risk can be managed and that there is a future in the cattle industry that is worth a shot. That future depends on making these tools more equitable for the cattle sector. When producers feel confident and supported, they can speak positively about the future, and that optimism is one of the most underrated succession tools. Thank you for the opportunity for the youth to be a part of this discussion. We hope to continue representing the next generation in framework discussions and look forward to your questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Schmidt, for being with us today. We will now go to Ms. Patterson from the sheep producers.
Mr. Chair, and thank you to the committee for the invitation to testify here today. My name is Corlina Patterson. I'm the Executive Director of the Canadian Sheep Federation, representing Canada's sheep farmers and ranchers right across the country. I want to begin with a central point underpinning what will be our recommendations. They are bold, if not provocative. BRM must protect existing farms from unavoidable shocks, but it must also help build future farms. If it only compensates losses without enabling renewal, it risks becoming a mechanism for managing decline rather than a pathway to growth. Canada's current BRM suite plays an important role. Producers need tools to manage income loss, production loss, natural hazards, disasters, and cash flow pressure when they face unavoidable shocks beyond their control. We're not suggesting that Canada should step back from supporting existing farms. Effective BRM program is essential to protecting current production capacity. But the current suite is designed primarily around farms that already exists. It assumes producers have production history, tax-filed margins, accumulated equity, collateral, and enough liquidity to participate in matching programs. Those assumptions do not hold for many new entrants, especially those without a farm into which to succeed. The questions for this committee is not only how can Canada protect farms from unavoidable shocks, it should also be how can Canada ensure BRM also supports renewal, new entry, and productive capacity that we'll need for decades ahead. The Canadian Sheep Federation is asking the governments to modernize BRM around food security, food sovereignty, domestic production capacity, and the next generation of Canadian farmers. Food sovereignty matters because Canada should have the capacity to produce more of the food that Canadians consume. Export markets matter, but when public dollars primarily reinforce production systems built around export markets, Canada risks subsidizing food security elsewhere, while leaving gaps in our own domestic food supply. BMR modernization should ensure Canadian dollars also strengthen Canada's ability to feed Canadians. As a result, our first recommendation is to create a dedicated next generation and domestic production capacity BRM fund. The fund should have two pathways, one that supports the people Canada needs to farm. These are new entrants and next generation producers, including those without inherited land, family assets, established equity, or historical production margins. The other should support the production capacity Canada needs to feed itself. Sectors where there is a demonstrated domestic supply gap, risk of losing critical productive capacity, or barriers preventing Canadian producers from meeting Canadian demand. Assuming the next pot of BRM dollars will not grow, we would suggest that this fund be financed by sunsetting the current universal Agri-Invest matching model before the next framework begins. Existing balances should be grandfathered and respected, of course, but future public matching dollars should be redirected into this targeted fund for 2028. Agri-Invest rewards existing sales and liquidity, and well-capitalized farms generally have access to more financial tools, where new entrants certainly do not. Our second recommendation is to modernize agri-stability. It remains an important but complex, slow, backward-looking, and difficult to bank on program. For livestock producers, the whole farm margin model can mask losses in specific enterprise. Canada can lose essential breeding animals, replacement stock, forage capacity, and regional production momentum, even when a whole farm margin calculation does not trigger support. We recommend tiered coverage that responds before a farm is in crisis, provisional reference margins for new entrants, a simplified track for smaller commercial farms, annual statements of coverage, pre-qualified stabilization advances, and an enterprise continuity rider for sectors with demonstrated domestic supply gaps. We have submitted in writing more background information with specific recommendations pertaining to agri-stability, as they are lengthy, but they're also targeted. Our third recommendation is to modernize agri-insurance, especially for livestock species and production systems that are not well served today. Agri-insurance can support livestock production insurance, but coverage remains uneven and province-specific. Sheep, goats, bison, and other livestock species face real production risks that deserve practical, modern insurance tools as well. For sheep producers, risk includes pasture and forage failure, drought-driven feed shortages, predation, disease-related mortality, severe weather impacts, heat stress, and loss of flock capacity after a natural environmental shock. We recommend a small ruminant and underserved livestock program, improved forage and pasture coverage, modernized predation coverage, and temporary premium support for new entrants. Lastly, agri-recovery should be protected for extraordinary disaster response and should not be treated as a funding source for BRM reform. The sheep sector is the practical food sovereignty example. Canada supplies less than half of the domestic lamb and mutton demand in this country. This is an unmet Canadian demand being filled by imports, and that demand is likely to grow. Supporting new entrants in sheep production is important. Replacement, food sovereignty, rural economic development, and market-responsive agricultural policy. With that, I thank you and look forward to your questions.
Thank you very much, Ms. Patterson. Appreciate your comments. We will now go to the Conservatives for 6 minutes, please. Mr. Gord.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur le Président. Ma question va...
Thank you, Chair. My question will be to Ms. Patterson. I am a sheep farmer. I've lambs at home. I won't tell you my life story, but you said that Canada produces only 50% of its domestic needs, and the rest is imported. But the sheep market is very interesting in Canada. From Christmas to Easter, lamb sells very well, and then it collapses after that. We're seeing dumping from other countries. We see lamb from New Zealand and Australia. Carcasses are at a rock-bottom price, so there's no stability. Prices are ridiculously low 6 months of the year and good 6 months of the year, so it's very difficult for farmers to manage their business. They're trying to sell lamb throughout the year, and because of production methods, they could. Could imports be limited by supporting in domestic production, and could that give a chance to many, many existing sheep farmers and new sheep farmers? Because we know that there is room for new producers, since a flock costs less than a cattle herd, and it's easier for a new family to start. Lambs are less dangerous. Of course, there's always a risk, but it's safer, and then they have an emotional appeal. So is there a strategy we could put in place to be useful? Sheep production, ovine production could increase enormously, but it'll take help.
I will answer in English so I can be more specific in my response. I appreciate your background in sheep farming and that you recognize that we are, in fact, often the gateway for new producers. Very low overhead and cost of entry means we're very attractive for those who want to embark in livestock production for the first time, including those without a history of doing so. With respect, though, to the seasonality of the markets historically over time, I would agree that we see some price fluctuation. I'm not sure that price fluctuation alone is the biggest inhibitor to increasing our market share on the grocery store shelves. It could be a certain influence, but I do see that starting to shift from seasonality to a consistent demand across the country as we see the demographics of our population change, especially as it pertains to those immigrating to Canada from countries where sheep and lamb is in fact a staple part of that diet. And that's going to help in part with that consistency and move us from a seasonal to a year-round, every meal sort of protein source. I think one of our we've long argued that one of our limiting abilities to compete on the open market, within Canada, is a function of our meat inspection system, the duality of the meat inspection system. We've made fairly significant comments to the discussions on Bill, I think it was Bill C2, around eliminating interprovincial trade barriers. Unfortunately, meat was left exempted from that. But that being said, it is one of the main reasons why Canadian producers have difficulty getting Canadian lamb onto Canadian store shelves. And so right now, the biggest market for sheep and lamb producers is provincially inspected plants, which tend to service those more holiday-type meals as opposed to those who want to see lamb on their plate at every meal. Should we have the capacity to compete in that large chain market, I think we would see a fairly significant and quick change in the stability of the pricing and also an encouragement of supply year-round as opposed to seasonality that we currently experience.
On remarque aussi dans le marché.
In the market, we're also seeing much more stability in regions like Toronto. Perhaps it's a bigger market, there are more slaughterhouses, they're more specialized. And the further out we go, be it east or west, if you're 1,000 kilometers away from Toronto, your lambs aren't very valuable. And the closer you get to Toronto, the price can go up and even double. This is difficult for producers. It's difficult for them to negotiate with slaughterhouses when their volumes are small. But having a baseline price in Canada might help producers from other provinces to have a fair price, because there isn't a fair price for all Canadian producers.
Can you hear me? Okay, so I would agree that there is a price disparity depending on where you are, not just 1,000 kilometers outside of the Toronto region, but we see it significantly in the West as well, where in fact we have probably a fairly significant opportunity for improving the flock because we have that land base that can support that grazing standard. Part of that, though, is that Toronto demand is a function of that's where the consumer is. And because of the meat inspection challenges we have and the inability to move provincially inspected meat across provincial borders, we have to move live animals long distances. And with that comes with significant shrink and the absorption of the cost of haulage to the producer. So you will pay less to a producer further outside because that cost of transport has to be absorbed as well as some of the shrink associated with it. We would argue if you have the capacity to process provincially in areas in the west and the east of that Toronto mecca for lamb, that we would have an opportunity to move the meat. Then the value to the producers in that region would be as high as those moving lambs into the Toronto area in order to supply that market.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Ms. Patterson. Thank you very
Merci
much,
beaucoup.
Mr. Gord. Now to Ms. Harrison for 6 minutes, please.
Thank you very much to the witnesses for being here. I have many questions, and I only have 6 minutes. Mr. Yule, when I saw that you were coming to, I was pretty excited and spent quite a bit of time on your website, actually. During a summer in university, I actually spent it in the interior of British Columbia, very close to a bison farm, and I run a cattle farm in Ontario and was raised on a cattle farm in Ontario, but I've always had a huge affinity for bison, and I think that people are unaware of the incredible environmental impact they have on the land that they are raised on. And I'm also just a huge fan of eating bison as well. I don't know if that's an appropriate thing to say, but it's also true. And lamb, actually. But anyways, so I was looking a little bit, and so I have lots of questions that probably span outside of the BRM suite necessarily. But I really appreciate the bison's ability to winter graze. And so I think that with BRM and ag stability, we need those programs in place so they work during the times, because winter grazing is a fantastic opportunity. Same with, but that being said, it comes with its own set of problems in an interesting period of time that we don't usually see in agriculture issues in the winter. So when it comes to BRM programs and bison specifically, I'm just going to give you an opportunity to share more of what you'd like to see, and if you could touch on maybe agri-marketing as well, and whether or not the producers within bison are using that. Do they find it effective? Is it being accessed at all? And what you would like to see moving forward with agri-marketing and ag stability?
Yeah. Well, thank you for the question, and thank you for your passionate way of proposing it there. So thank you so much. We use, I'll start with the agri-stability question. We have access to agri-stability funds, or agri-marketing funds, and we use them every year in conjunction, in partnership with what we call our marketers, the folks that are actually processing and selling the meat, and look for ways to enhance like you mentioned, or like you obviously know, like the benefits of eating bison, both to your diet as well as to the environment. So we work to enhance sales domestically and then internationally into the U.S. and into the EU as well by using those agri-marketing funds. Agri-stability, there's like I said, it's not overly utilized in our sector, and one of the reasons is its treatment of, I think, pasture and winter grazing, and it's a shortfall, and it reduces the predictability, and because the bison quite often are spending the entire year out in the pasture and supplemented as needed during the winter. So it is a shortfall. I don't have the specific answer right now in terms of what that might look like to make some changes there, but it is something that comes up for sure.
Thank you. So you guys were established in your federation in 1983, and have you seen a significant growth within the bison industry since the inception of? Is it called a federation? The bison.
Yeah, Canadian Bison Association.
Yes.
Yeah, I would say there's basically the 1980s were kind of the beginning of the industry part of bison, and there's absolutely been a significant increase. We don't have super sophisticated data avenues to explore, but we rely somewhat on the census data, which of course is now it's 6 years old and will hopefully coming out again this fall. But we peaked at about 1,000 farms last census, and about 150,000 animals. So, yeah.
When it comes to export, is the meat that's exported, is it predominantly like a ground or a boneless, or is it whole animal?
The majority of what happens is whole. It's live animals. Live animals are going across the border and being processed down in the States. At one point, some of it was being re-imported back because of lack of processing capacity here in Canada. That's changed a little bit in the last, like I mentioned, in the last year. There's been quite a shift in long-term trends in the last calendar year, which is interesting to watch.
And when it comes to the EU, what is the market like for bison?
It's I'd say it's stable. It's not huge. It's not massive, and it's stable. There hasn't been a lot of growth there since in the last few years, at least. But it's an important avenue for us for sure. And the marketers that are moving meat over there they like it for sure. I think we need more markets to be exposed to, but and at the same time, it's kind of a catch-22 because, like I mentioned, our supply is down, and so we don't have a lot of extra to sell to those new markets if we had them. But in anticipation of surplus at some point, these things all these industries and commodities ebb and flow, and we look forward to having some more adequate supply at some point. But demand is growing, and so that's the good thing.
Okay, thank you, Tim. Ms. Patterson, I don't know if you can answer this, but I would love to know more specifically to what a new entrance BRM program might look like. I can appreciate fully what it's like to, my dad passed away in 2010, and the farm sat, and my mom at that point had sold off, like tractor, everything, had to restart, so I can fully appreciate being raised on a farm, but also then the cost incurred to start a farm. So more specifically, I'd love to know what you'd like to see as in the time that you have.
Sorry, Ms. Patterson, your time is up. Sorry.
So many bison questions.
I know,
sorry.
so many bison questions.
So sorry.
Ms. Patterson, you're more than welcome to submit that in writing, or if another colleague gives you some time to answer that on a new entrance program as a BRM, maybe that you'll have that opportunity. But Mr. Lemire, for 6 minutes, s'il vous plaît.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Chair. Mr. Yule, I'll begin with you. Every year in Abitibi-Témiscamingue, and particularly in Témiscamingue, there's a food fair. And it's a great pleasure to find bison burgers from the area in August. This is a great pleasure for many people in my region. How can we ensure that bison meat, in particular, can be marketed, can be found in grocery stores and available in restaurants in Quebec and Ontario? How can we foster the availability of bison meat on our menus?
And I would say that probably bison meat is more available than it ever has been before in domestic retail. Prior to COVID, a lot of the efforts of our marketers were towards food services, and then of course when COVID hit, they kind of shifted gears, and now I think they've seen that as a real positive move that they made. And like it's in most major retail stores. Again, because of the short supply, I would call ahead before I showed up at your grocery store. But I know like Costco's become the largest distributor of bison meat in Canada, as it is in the U.S. If it's not in the store, it's definitely online, and yeah.
Comme je vous dis, moi je suis à une dizaine de kilomètres.
As I was saying, I'm about 10 kilometers away. There is a border there. There's no a Costco in Rwanda or Abitibi-Témiscamingue. That's an additional challenge. But I'm wondering about our ability to process the meat in remote and rural regions. And the same thing would apply to lamb or mutton. So how do we meet processing needs, particularly slaughtering and marketing in local networks, local circuits, on a more local scale? How do you see that? How can we help your industry get closer to a more local market?
Yeah, there's a lot of on-farm sales. So if you go on our website, for instance, you'll see where you can buy locally directly from the farm. A lot of producers have gone that way, particularly if there's a challenge moving animals to a federal plant, and so there's an opportunity there. And I would say a large number of, especially in Quebec and Ontario, because of all the federal plants, or the majority of the federal processing is in Alberta and in Manitoba. So a lot of the producers out here, which there are a number for sure, the president of our association is actually from just outside of Toronto, and he does a lot of on-farm sales, has a market every Saturday morning, and so there's a number of those types of examples out there, and I could show you on our website where you could access them.
Madame Patterson, voulez-vous réagir?
Yes.
Ms. Patterson?
I've been working with the CFIA to see how we can evolve our meat inspection systems to help support the availability of that product on those store shelves. 80% of the sheep and lamb in Canada are processed in provincially inspected facilities, which means once processed cannot move outside those borders. And given, in part, the large grocery store chains' centralized distribution of frozen meat and meat products, it makes it very difficult then to not only get that provincial product into those distribution centers, but then across to the stores it supplies in various jurisdictions. So I think, and we have historically what we've called, CFIA quotes this now, but we called that attempt at processing plants that were provincially inspected to go to federal inspection and be able then to move product across provinces. For our industry has been called the kiss of death. And that is because you can't wrap up that production fast enough to fill your kill lines on the early days of your federal inspection, which comes at a far greater financial cost in operations. And so they couldn't sustain themselves through a growth period that would have enough producers supplying those plants in order to fill the kill line and make them profitable. And it's almost always resulted in a closure of those plants. So simply suggesting, we've heard this from other folks along the way, everybody should be federally inspected. Not sustainable with the number ahead that we're currently processing. One day, yes, with the ability to ramp up over time. So the proposal being drafted by CFIA may help fit with that because it offers an opportunity for a provincial plant to move with agreements between different provinces to move processed meat into those provinces, and then for a time-limited period of 5 to 8 years, and then make a decision whether they want to become fully federally inspected or can be federally inspected on some days and process product for those provincial movements. That would allow gradually our ability to get more of our product into the distribution centers and onto the mainstream shelves so that the Canadian consumer can appreciate Canadian lamb more than they currently can.
Merci beaucoup. Mon temps est écoulé.
Merci very much. We will now go to Mr. Bonk for 5 minutes, please.
All right, I'll maybe direct my comments towards Ryder and Braden off the start here. So we know that the cattle producers are some of the most risk-tolerant people by necessity, the most risk-tolerant people in business today. And, the cattle industry has been through a lot when it comes to, very volatile markets. We've got weather to worry about. We have increasing amount of government regulation in Canada that's, adding extra costs to our producers. But now the Liberals have two things in their hands right now that are existential threats to the Canadian cattle industry, and that would be the renegotiation of CUSMA and Mercosur. And Mercosur is just, as we know, it's a, fire alarm situation for the Canadian cattle industry. And maybe I'll just ask you, Ryder, real quickly, can you just outline some of the potential impacts and the devastating effect that they'll have on the Canadian cattle industry?
Well, thanks for the question, and the framing is bang on. It's something that I look at simple solutions and often have secondary or long-range impacts, but this one's right away. And the idea right now is well, food affordability, let's import more and bring that price down. Well, we already import 30% of the beef we sell in Canada, so any market impact of that is already going to be priced in. So what we've got is a small herd with some positive signals going to people like Braden to maybe keep some heifers, keep some cows, and regrow that herd. And if we just displace the supply that would provide, that takes away that signal, takes away that ability to regrow our herd, and really won't have the benefit that's being purported from moving forward with this. So just to be able to check a box to say we got this new agreement isn't a win.
I'd ask you really quickly, just outline some of the phytosanitary and traceability issues that we could have in Canada. And I know this is going to also affect the bison because they share the same disease risks that cattle do.
Right, and the CUSMA thing is also very important. So we've got our biggest export customer that has some experience with South American beef and slowness in reporting BSE cases and trust issues like that we haven't been there to inspect their food safety system in a long time. So the track record isn't very good. Our biggest export customer isn't comfortable with this. And so not only is it about our domestic market, but it's also about our biggest customer market and what steps do they take if they see us as backdooring this supply into North America.
Exactly. Now, quickly, if I could ask you, Braden or Mr. Schmidt, if you could just comment on, do you think that if the Liberal government signs a CUSMA agreement and uses beef as a bargaining chip, what signal does that send to youth in Canada about getting into the cattle industry?
Yes, thank you for the question. I think it'll create further hesitation to invest and expand and grow. I do think we're at very optimistic times for the younger generation with the value right now. And I do think that some disruptions in negotiations with our trading counterparts would heavily impact the willingness of the younger generation to come home, on a full-time basis or to invest into the business solely.
So I'm going to direct the next comment to Mr. Ewell. I was talking to a bison producer this morning in my constituency, and he said that the biggest threat to his operation is government policy. And he was talking specifically about the CUSMA agreement. And could you just maybe expand on what you had said earlier about how important that is to the Canadian bison industry and the risk it would have for future production in Canada?
Yeah, well, I mentioned quickly in my opening comments about 2 years ago, 80% of our animals went south of the border live, and like I said, our marketers have done an amazing job leading up to that. I mean, without knowing some of the issues that were going to happen or potentially happen at the border, but by increasing slaughter capacity here in Canada and increasing demand here in Canada, so they've done an excellent job. But even last year, with that reduction in animals going across the border, it was still 50%. And so, if anything ever happened to that border, it would be devastating for the industry, not only here but in the U.S. So, I mean, our counterparts in the U.S. are as worried about it as we are because I pretend to be a bit of a statistician, and if I look at the numbers of animals that we've exported versus what they've slaughtered in the U.S., they've had a lot of growth in demand as well, and if you look over the last 10 years, about 80% of their growth has been with Canadian animals going south. So, and then last year when we reduced our quantity going across the border, they processed fewer animals because of that, and about 60% of the lower volume was due to the lack of Canadian animals. So it's important for both of our industries. I quite often call it a North American industry. They're not growing anywhere else in the world, and between Canada and the U.S., obviously, that's where most of it's eaten. So,
would you see a cost-shared livestock price insurance program as beneficial? Yes or no?
I'll just. Your time's up. I would just, if you're okay, Mr. Ewell, on the livestock price insurance, if you're okay to submit your answer, or unless Paul will let you answer that. Paul, are you going to let him answer that?
I'm going to ask him a question.
You're great.
5 minutes. Thank you, and thank you to all our witnesses coming out. And just to be on the record, I love sheep, I love bison, and I love beef. I love it all. Just to make sure I got that on the record. On April 28, we had a witness here from Newfoundland, a young beef producer, who told us that he really doesn't have any access or has limited access to public or private insurance options available to protect him from weather events or outside of. There's insurance that he for market price stability, but that doesn't even cover what he really needs. So I'm going to ask all three, and we can start with the bison. what type of, or what improvements do you think should be made to livestock insurance to assist the industry?
Well, we don't have access to any pricing insurance tools at all. So yeah, any step in that direction would be a benefit because it's we grow a commodity and the prices go up and down, and there's weather events that happen that make you have to sell and distort the market, things like that. So yeah, any kind of a pricing insurance would be highly beneficial.
So you don't have any public or private insurance that you can access?
Not that I'm aware of, no.
How about sheep industry?
Yeah, the same. We haven't coverage, especially under agri-insurance, so it is one of our key recommendations that we should expand the scope of species that can access that. I think it's important, too, in considering that, to look at the differences in sort of that reestablishment phase if you have a disaster. So the insurance, especially as it relates to the loss of breeding stock, for example, if you lose a crop, next year is a new crop. If you lose your breeding stock or your genetics because of environmental disaster, because you had to sell off, there was simply a drought forced a shortage of feed and you can't feed them and you have to let them go. Rebuilding that genetic base is more than a one-year project, right? It's multi-years to get back to reestablish your flock or herd after a shock as such. So I think that's important. We don't currently have it. There was a question earlier for the previous panel about private insurances, and we had in our sector had a very specific disease-related private insurance that was covered for a number of years. It was not an imminent disease risk, and so there wasn't a lot of uptake. We made an effort to get a second round for different disease coverage, and we found from a private insurer perspective, insuring livestock diseases was not an easy sell. I do like the idea. I think there's opportunities to share those risks between a public insurance and a private insurance, starting with public and topping up with private as need be. But again, very difficult to sell to insurance brokers without some sort of support, at least fundamentally, from government programs.
I want to give the Cattle Association an opportunity to speak as well.
Yes, thank you for the question and the time. The beef sector is fortunate to have a few insurance options. I think it's important to keep a suite of options viable for producers because of how different the sectors are in beef. Our biggest ask when it comes to LPI would be for the government to introduce cost-shared premiums, and that it's a permanent national program. And then also keeping awareness around agri-stability, as this definitely helps and aids the larger sectors, such as the feeding sector and the mid to large size operations. The CCA AGM was also fortunate to have a presentation on whole farm insurance from AAFC, and that is something that perks the interest of the youth, and we look forward to the progress on that as well in times ahead.
Just for clarification, is the insurance that you say is available, is that available in all provinces or only in certain provinces across the country?
It's available in most provinces, but I'd have to kick it over to Ryder for sure to confirm if it's all provinces or...
Yeah, your Newfoundland and Labrador producer wouldn't have it available. It's a tool that's available to provinces to provide. Quebec and Ontario have their own programs, but the maritime provinces, I guess Newfoundland isn't that, just got into that game. So we're looking to make that permanent outside of the framework and available everywhere for sure.
Thank you very much, Mr. Connors. Appreciate giving them a chance to answer. We'll now finish up with Mr. Lemaire for 2.5 minutes, please.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Chair. Mr. Yule, somewhat earlier talked about agri-marketing. In the U.S. this morning, I had a meeting with cranberry producers in Quebec, and they are taking steps to foster less well-known programs. A program provides subsidies. Agri-marketing provides $1 for $1 subsidy. Could this be done for products that are less well known, that are more niche, and that might help consumers discover Canadian products internationally?
Yeah, thanks for the question. I mean, we do use agri-marketing, if that was your question. We do use agri-marketing to promote consumption domestically, internationally in the U.S. and in the EU, and it is a valuable tool. I mean, the challenge with I would say us at the association is that we have a tough time finding resources to come up with the 50%. We partner quite a bit with our marketers, the guys that are actually selling the meat, but if they're not interested in exploring certain avenues, then we have to pick up the tab, and it becomes cost prohibitive even at the 50% range. So.
Et pouvez-vous nous parler rapidement du marché?
Could you give us a few brief words about the institutional market? How could that provide us solutions, for example, schools, prisons, even though they do come under provincial jurisdiction? Could any guarantees be provided to an industry like the bison industry to help it develop more effectively in Canada?
My speaker, I'm not sure what I'm doing wrong. Could you? Yeah, the translation's not coming through.
This is the English channel. When your microphone is on.
Sound, Scott. Donc, ma question était comment...
So my question was this. How can we give you a more effective access to the institutional market? Is that a market you're aiming at? Prisons, hospitals, schools, they do often come under provincial jurisdiction, but is there a market there that could provide you with some stability in your production?
Yeah, I mean, that would be an interesting market to explore. We haven't spent much time thinking about that institutional market at all. It's been mostly consumer, like regular consumers that we've been driving at. But I know in the U.S., it's all the school programming. A lot of the school kids are getting fed bison, which is controversial down there because it's the government of the U.S. buying bison, and it's distorted the market to some degree. But yeah, that's an interesting avenue.
Thank you very much, Mr. Yule. Thank you very much, Mr. Lemire. I want to thank our witnesses for being here in this panel. You are now excused, and unless there's any other business, Mr. Rapp.
Just to say your handling of the meeting was tough but fair. The minister, we asked about that at the end of last meeting. If Sophie would have I know she spoke to me after the meeting, so.
Yeah, the question would be, would you...
For the estimates, he used to
would
appear,
September be okay to
When do the estimates due?
You asked for it, so when is...
No, when is the estimates?
The estimates. The main, it would be to come in on the main estimates.
Yeah. You asked for the meeting, so you had a date in mind? Sorry, Dave.
Yeah, the Tuesday or a Thursday when the committee meets. Before the end of May, I think was the question. Yeah, before we rise. Yeah.
But we also started that food security study. And I'm sorry, I don't know exactly when the date are due. I may come back to you on that, or we can look.
Right.
But, yeah.
But I thought you confirmed to me privately. I was just going to get it back on the record that I thought you confirmed to me after the meeting that he was able to come when we left the last meeting. So that's for the benefit of the rest of the committee.
So the request is to come for the estimate and not during the food security study.
Correct, for the main estimate.
Yeah, before the end of May.
Okay,
we're dealing with them for June, right?
Sorry, I'll have to get back to you on that.
Okay, because we're dealing with the estimates in June, right? So.
In June, okay.
Thank you. So if I'm reading the room correctly, the request is to see if the minister can come before the spring recess. Well, thank you very much, and now you got to see the inner workings of how we come to these hard decisions. But thank you very much. Is there will of the committee to adjourn? Yes, sir. Meeting adjourned. Thank you very much. Have a great weekend.
Merci spécial à nos interprètes.
A special thank you to our interpreters.